Welcome back to Still Speak. This is episode 6 of my Summerwells series. If you've not seen the last 5 episodes, please pause, go listen to those, and come back. It'll be better for you to hear those first so you can better follow along in this episode. Okay, so I mentioned in the last episode I was going to be talking about a man named Mark Lunsford. Mark's daughter went missing from her home around 3 a.m. in February of 2005. She was 9 years old. She lived with her father and grandparents in the grandparents' home in Homosassa, Florida. And I recall this story. I followed it closely, and I was in discussion forums online because back then, Facebook was not, it was around, but it was not widely used. Mark had spent the night at his girlfriend's house, and when he returned home, he heard his daughter's alarm going off for school, and he went in to turn it off. He discovered her missing. So this means that she was put to bed and was at home in her grandparents' care the night of her disappearance. Mark and his father were both accused of having something to do with her disappearance. They gave Mark a computer voice stress test, which came back as being not deceptive. Despite that, the FDLE, which is the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, requested a polygraph as well, which allegedly came back as being deceptive. When the FBI got involved in the case, they wanted their own polygraph examiners to also perform one on Mark and now also on his father, Archie. Allegedly, both of their results were inconclusive. So you had conflicting results for Mark specifically, which caused Mark to be implicated in the disappearance of his daughter. And the public came up with all sorts of theories that included Mark and Archie, the grandfather, of sexually assaulting Jessica and then killing her to hide the sexual assault. The conclusion of the story was the neighbor had a lengthy criminal history, including sexually assaulting a child on the list. He was adult when he did this. John Cooey had come into their home through an unlocked door, and he cut the screen that was in front of the door by the handle to gain access to the handle. He walked right up in there and snatched Jessica as her grandparents slept in their relatively small trailer, or some would call double wide. He took Jessica to his home and held her there for 3 days and sexually assaulted her over the course of those 3 days, which is just horrible. He even claimed at one point he had put her in a closet and told her not to leave the closet while he went to work, and that poor girl didn't leave the closet, probably due to being completely terrified. Talk about taking a risk. Cooey, who was convicted of this heinous crime later, put Jessica in black garbage bags and tied her hands together. She had a stuffed dolphin, for Pete's sake, tucked into her arm that her dad had gotten for her. And she was put alive in that bag in a shallow grave outside the trailer that he held her at. Jessica suffocated to death just 65 yards from her grandparents' home as her family and searchers were looking for her. Jessica's body was recovered 3 weeks after her disappearance. Cooey had said that cops knocked on his door twice, and both times they didn't go inside. And if they had, they would have found Jessica alive, he claimed. How unbelievably tragic is that? Okay? Now, she was 65 yards away from her home. For better understanding of how close that is, 1 mile is 1,760 yards, and Jessica was only 65 yards away. Now think about what happens when a child goes missing. Think of the teams of searchers and police and helicopters and dogs, the FBI, all of which was, used in this case. This man not only took the risk of taking her from a very small trailer, double-wide home with other adults in the home at the time, but he also took the risk of taking her and keeping her only 65 yards away. And an even more massive risk of leaving her in a closet at one point to go to work. Flabbergasting that right outside his door, people were frantically trying to locate her, and unfortunately her death was preventable. However, There's laws and guidelines and procedures and protocols in place for a reason. Knowing she was inside, of course Cooey wasn't going to let them in willingly, and therefore they would have needed to obtain a search warrant, which means they would have needed probable cause to even get a warrant. Mark not only had to deal with being accused and implicated in his daughter's disappearance and even accusing, the accusations of sexual assault against her, he also had to come to grips with knowing his daughter was 65 yards away for those first 3 days as he was hooked up to a polygraph test, which is not even admissible in a court of law for good reason. Mark was outspoken, and he continued to be outspoken even after Jessica's body was recovered, and went on to threaten a lawsuit against the Citrus County Police Department. And there were heated back and forth press conferences between Mark and the Citrus County Sheriff before the two men had a meeting to resolve the issue, which at that time, Mark promised not to sue and instead pledged to work with the sheriff to improve the policy and procedures for child abduction cases. Mark went after the media as well, telling them in a press conference that they sensationalized the story instead of talking about what is wrong with some of the policies and procedures. And Mark has become an advocate, and he's done extensive work in his daughter's name and fighting for Jessica's law. Jessica's law mandates a minimum of 25-year prison sentence and lifetime electronic monitoring for adults convicted of lewd acts against a child under the age of 12. Stop Child Predators has helped pass versions of the law in 46 other states. So, you're either wondering what the hell this has to do with Summer, or you've already made the connection, so let's break it down, okay? Don Wells is being hit from every damn way. He, like Mark, took a polygraph. Don says he's passed. We have no idea if he did or if he didn't, but it doesn't really matter because the science isn't really behind a polygraph anyway. Don has criticized law enforcement, and possibly out of frustration, and Don has gone after YouTubers, which is a new form of media, if he felt that a channel had wronged him or his wife, and Mark too went after the police and the media. While the home Jessica lived in was a trailer double-wide home, it was a nicely kept one, but let's face it, there's a stigma surrounding living in such. It's terrible, but that's a reality. People can claim they don't judge someone based upon where they live, but the majority absolutely do. Just look at the Facebook comments of cases that people do not appear to be affluent. And you can see that. Mark was a hard-working single father, very active in his daughter's life. Her mom was not around, and he was doing the best he could with the help from his parents. And when people saw Mark, they saw, like a hillbilly, and, others called him trailer trash, which is terrible. He had a long hair and goatee, and unfortunately his looks alone made people think the absolute worst of him, like sexually assaulting and murdering his daughter. And many have looked at Don in the same way. They can try to say that they haven't, but they absolutely have. Let's look at his Facebook. It's all right there. And not so great information came out about Don later, like in the last month, but they were judging him prior to that information. They absolutely were. And it's one of the reasons why this story has gained traction. Now, you add in the home that Don's family resides in, and he's looked at the same way as Mark was looked at, as trash. Now, both Don and Mark have been accused and implicated in the disappearance of their daughters by the public and YouTubers and podcasts, media, whatever. Some media, not mainstream media. And both accused of possibly sexually assaulting their own daughters, and both were accused of this with zero evidence showing such. Are Mark and Don the exact same? We don't know yet. Could they be living mirrored lives 16 years apart from one another? Could be. Do they have a lot of similarities? Well, yeah, I just outlined them. Right? Beyond comparing the two fathers, what's bugging me is people saying or claiming there was too much risk for, an offender to take Summer. John Cooey waltzed up into Jessica's room in a home that was not big by any means, with her grandparents sleeping in the next room, and walked right out with her. He kept her alive for days, with searchers looking for her right outside. I'm going to say it again. 65 yards. 65 damn yards. That's nothing. If an offender wants something, they're going to make it happen. And there's always a risk when committing a crime. You're either going to get caught or you're not. It's risk number one. It's a 50-50 chance. Either you're going to get away with it or you're not. Now, around the Wells home, there are sexual offenders, registered sex offenders. And that sticks out to me because it is a rural area. So less houses, and yet several live out there. Now, those are the ones that are registered in the database, which means those are the ones that have been caught. They did the crime, they got caught, now they're back out in society, which now makes them experienced. They know what got them caught last time, and now know how to handle it the next go-around. Because statistically, they usually reoffend. I'm not going to say all, but many, many do. Now, how many live out there that have never been caught and aren't registered or in the database? How many, was staying out there with a neighbor or on somebody's property as a plotter that nobody even knew about and has since left the area at some point in the last 2.5 months? John Cooey, he was caught because he left the state as an offender while Jessica was missing, which caught, the police's attention. And I think there's a great possibility that Summer was abducted. It's actually at the top of my theories. And we're going to explain, I'm going to explain more of that as we go along. Now let me give you another story where a man took great rest taking a little girl. And this one happened when I was newly pregnant with my first child. And it was not far from where I was living at the time. I remember the phase of when they were still searching for her. And I even remember seeing the helicopters near my area when I would drive home from work. And it happened in northern Florida. And the town that she lived in is a very populated town, but it's also a very rural area. So one side you have a massive military base, and it's extremely populated over there. And to the other side, it's rural, and it leads into another town, which is a very much country living type, area with farms and land. Now, the story is about Summer Thompson. Now, Summer's name was spelled differently. It was S-O-M-E-R instead of S-U-M-M-E-R. Little Summer left school with her siblings, one of which was her twin brother, and then her older sister. There was a spat at the beginning of their walk home between the two sisters that, made Summer upset, and she took off ahead of them. Of course, being kids, they didn't think much of her running ahead, and because they walked that same route home every single day that they had school, they didn't think much of it. So now think about it. School here, that's around 3:34. So this was daylight in a neighborhood with many houses, and siblings were also walking behind her. She couldn't have ran that far ahead, right? She was a little girl, just 7. But there was a home that she often stopped at to pet a white dog on her way home, but no one would ever come out of that home until that day. Crime of opportunity. Just by chance that day, she was alone. And the predator quickly seized the opportunity and was able to get her inside before the other kids passed the house, her siblings. Her siblings walked right past the home their sister was in on their way to their house, having no idea that she had been snatched. Sadly, Summer's body was later found in a landfill, a state away, 2 days later. And I remember it being said that Mom was at work and that the children's stepdad was at home, and people accused him of being involved in her disappearance because they felt like, why would he let them walk home rather than just go pick them up? And of course, everybody jumped to, he did something before the other kids got home. And now we obviously know that that's untrue. But think of the risk this man took. The predator had no way of knowing Summer would be alone that day until he saw her outside his house. It was broad daylight in the middle of the day when school had just been let out, so a lot of cars and buses were on the road in a neighborhood with many houses, and her siblings just minutes behind her. It doesn't always have to be premeditated when somebody snatches a child. I'm sure he was well aware of the kids walking past the house every day, and that he knew that Summer would often pet the white dog near there. But she was typically with one or both of her siblings. It's either that he waited for a day that she would hopefully be alone so he could have premeditated, or he got lucky and in a second's decision decided to take her and risked a ton to do such. Car seeing it, bus seeing it, one of the siblings, a neighbor, somebody on a bike, riding home from school. He risked her screaming loud enough for her siblings to hear her. And he also took a risk because he took her off a trail that the cops were first focused on because that was her normal route. He took so much risk. And this is only 2 stories out of thousands upon thousands. What is kind of making me scratch my head is the talk that there's too much risk for a stranger to take separate from the property, but same people think that the parents took massive risks to cover up a crime. So, it's believable to them that, parents would take that risk, but a stranger wouldn't. How about this? How about if someone has a goal in mind, they're going to take the risk regardless of who it is and what the risks are. Okay? It confuses me that people can think that Dawn Wells either left work or never went to work and had a hand in making her disappear or even sold her for drugs, but they can't believe that an offender or a stranger would take the risk to snatch her from the property. It is an unbelievable risk to sell a child. That involves a second party. And anytime there's more than one party involved, it ups the risk because you have to trust that the second party won't cave or turn you in or themselves in or leave behind any evidence that leads back to you. When you're the sole person involved, you only have yourself to trust. And it's very believable to me that a random plotter sitting on their cluttered, dense, rough terrain filled with sheds and junk cars and broken down school buses and more on the property, was waiting for the perfect chance because they had been watching the family's pattern end summer. When considering Dawn sold her theory, ask yourself, where's the money then? We're not talking $100 when you're selling a child. And where are the drugs? Okay? Surely if he sold her, excuse me, my child interrupted me. But surely if he sold her, right, for money or drugs, where is it? Where are they keeping it? Because the cops have been all up on their property. Where is it? Where they got to show for it? You're going to tell me that the massive amount of drugs that they bought for selling their daughter is gone already? I don't think so. But let's talk about Dawn and if he left work to go home and snatch her in return. That makes witnesses, unless he was working alone. But according to him, he saw co-workers and his boss that day. Now, I do believe that a couple of the co-workers confirmed on a YouTube channel that he was at work. But we don't know that as fact. Cops know whether or not that's true. Now, leaving the job site around, let's say, 3:30 when Summer got home that day, and that means he drove 35, 40 minutes there, depending on that small amount of time for the return, you got to add that in, snatch her, harm her, hide her, or sell her. So basically 2.5 hours time gone by from a job site gets you back there around 6 p.m. Only to then get a phone call immediately after that, and then leaving again now makes a total, of all these witnesses, a ton of witnesses. Tons of witnesses equals a ton of risk. And how obvious would it be if he left work for over 2 hours and then, poof, his daughter is now missing? This sounds like a bit of a reach as far as theories are concerned. It is possible, of course, like anything, but logically thinking, it just doesn't fit. At least not for me or yet. Now, if we find out later that the coworkers, told the cops something differently and that he wasn't at work, or that he did leave, then that would be a totally different story and a huge red flag, no doubt. Then Dawn would have some explaining to do. I Love Lucy. About where he was and where he went, and the cops would have covered that by now and cornered him over it. Where were you? Your GPS says that you left. Why weren't you at work? Your coworker said you weren't there. They would have cornered him and hounded him over and over and over again. Now, yes, that's a lot of risk, but I just told you 2 stories of people who took a lot of risk. My point, though, is, we want to consider that, a stranger wouldn't take all those risks, but you want to consider that Dawn would have, when that theory alone involves a lot of risk, a ton of risk. So, theories that include Don as the sole person in the family, doesn't really fit for me, at least not yet. Now, is it possible he was not the sole person, but is helping with a cover-up? Well, that's happened before, but is that what's happening in the Wells case? That would mean more than one party, and again, it ups the risk of one turning on another. That would also mean Candace would have to trust Don enough to call him, to tell him that she killed their daughter, or that Summer accidentally died, and then hope and trust he would help her cover it up and not report it to police. What would Don's motive be to help Candace? Not like these two have some super amazing close marriage or anything. I mean, shoot. She called the cops on him back in October of 2020. Why would she trust that he wouldn't do the same to her in regards to the death or murder of her daughter? I mean, she would have to really trust that he wouldn't turn her in. Some think the two were afraid of CPS coming and taking the 3 boys, so colluded to hide her body. But that makes no sense because they called the police. Calling the police to their their junk-filled property and not so safe house is bad, if not worse, than involving CPS. That would be more believable if, let's say, they never reported her missing until much later, or made up some off-the-wall, crazy-ass story like Casey Anthony told about why she didn't report her sooner, right? So, if they were worried about CPS, it doesn't make sense because they called the police. It just doesn't. And Candace knows full well that CPS and the police work hand in hand, so that doesn't make any sense to me. So, overall, I'm not sold that Don is involved in any way in the disappearance of his daughter so far. It just doesn't add up to me so far. If anything new comes out, soon that is factual, I'll definitely reconsider the possibility, of course. In cases like this, you get a lot of sources that come forth with random information, and the majority of these sort of sources, later come out, it comes out that they were full of it, and, or they had no connection, and just wanted 15 minutes of fame. Then you have, distant relatives, or relatives when there's not much of a relationship there who come forth as well, and people who come forth with their own names and are confirmed to be who they claim to be are usually more honest than the people that confirmed or who refuse to use their name. Both sets of people who come forth with information, have later been found to be a lie. But others are truthful. Now, that being said, halfway into this case, Don's stepsister spoke out, and then she went on a YouTube channel to tell everybody that Don sexually assaulted her as a child. Okay? This is how Don ended up getting accused of sexually assaulting Summer. Now, for context here, Don is 56 years old. I believe it was said that he's 7 years older than the stepsister. That means she is roughly about 49 years old now. So she claimed that it started when she was 5. And so this would have been 44 years ago, and it lasted until she was 12, so that makes it 37 years ago. And people were floored over this information and immediately jumped to accuse Don of doing the same to Summer, and the entire theory is based on this woman's personal, heartbreaking, terrible, horrible story alone, and no actual facts. It should be noted, he has no criminal history involving anything sexual. He does have a criminal record, but not of sexual in nature. Now, obviously, no criminal history of it doesn't mean that it didn't happen or it hasn't happened to others besides her. It just means he didn't get caught or do time for anything sexually related. Now, Don has confirmed that this happened, but he definitely downplayed it as a mutual back and forth thing. Now, maybe that was his perception of what happened, or maybe that was just pure up, straight up deception. One thing I will argue against is the one saying that at the age he was back then that he should have known better. I will. I'm going to argue against it. I don't know that. I struggle with this because we're all different, and we're all on different social and emotional levels, and when we're teens, we're all on different maturity levels. Don is definitely also a product of his environment, and it's clear when researching both Don and Candace's past, you can see that. And often in these situations, learned bad behaviors are normal in the person's eyes, and they don't see it as bad, and therefore the whole he would have known right from wrong may not be the case here. We don't know that. We have no idea the dynamics, the deep dynamics of the Don's family. But remember when I said to remember Don never feeling loved until Summer? Then when prompted to explain that, he immediately jumped to his parents divorcing in his childhood and felt hated by his step-parents of both his mom and dad. Is that true? We don't know. And without more information than that, we have no idea what caused this behavior during his teen years. And honestly, it's not my business. It is brave of her to speak out, though, and I'm not defending or justifying Don. But I do wonder what caused him to act in that way at that time in his life. My only concern is with this information, was it relayed to the police before it was released to the public on YouTube? Did she come forth because she thinks it could be connected to Summer, or because she just wanted to speak to Don's character? Did she consider that coming forth would take the attention off Summer? Because unfortunately it did. It did. And I think both stories are really sad, right? And it definitely doesn't make Don feel, look good. And I'm not going to defend sexual assault. I'm not. But it definitely took off of Summer, and the two stories may not be, connected at all. Now, my hang-up is, without further analysis into the family dynamic and history of the possible family trauma deep within the Wells family line, I'm not sure that we can connect it to Summer being missing 37 years later. It's a long time. Okay? It's a really long time. I think we can acknowledge and support the stepsister, but also critically consider on our own whether it can be connected to Summer, because there's absolutely zero evidence of any kind to back a theory right now that he sexually assaulted his daughter. So please forgive me for separating the two heartbreaking stories unless evidence comes out as such. The reason I want to separate the two is I think it's bad enough that Summer is missing, and it's bad enough she may be dead. I refuse to victimize her even further. For all we know, he was not doing such a thing to his own daughter, and that Summer loved him very much, and vice versa. We don't need to add anything to an already tragic situation. It's unfair to Summer. And if you claim to care about Summer, why would you put that on her when you have no idea if that's true? It's not fair. It's not. I had to address that elephant in the room before proceeding with discussing Don. I'm not trying to upset anybody. Trust me, I analyzed it and I came to the conclusion that as of now, nothing supports that he was doing that to Summer. You could connect it if it makes sense to you. I'm just not going to do it. Now, I do believe, and based off statistics, that child sex offenders typically continue or reoffend. For sure, the data supports that. However, I did a lot of bad things in teen years. Nothing remotely as horrific as that, by any means. Right? But I did. That does not define who I am over 20 years later. I was young. I was dumb. I was naive. I had zero life experiences. And, I didn't have life and time and age and experiences to shape me into who I am today yet. Now, if I was in my 40s, still doing what I did back then yeah, absolutely, it defines who I am. But that brings me back to, we don't have any idea if Don continued that behavior, and we certainly don't know if, he paused for almost 40 years and then started again with his own daughter. I mean, if you think back to Mark Lunsford, he too was accused of such, and his daughter was sexually assaulted, but it wasn't by him. Okay? Wasn't by him, but she was. It's awful. Absolutely awful. Now, that's sensitive. That's a sensitive topic. But it's another piece of the story we have to discuss, and it's unavoidable. Based on my understanding, and I need to look this up further, that child sex, when an adolescent commits a sexual offense in their teen years, they don't typically reoffend. Adult sex offenders do reoffend. And I'm going to look that up and get back to you on that, because I'm almost positive that's what I read not too long ago for another case. Because, yeah, this has come up other times. And, yeah, so I said in a prior episode the Wells have been way more cooperative than I would ever have been, and done things far beyond what was ever expected of them, like letting strangers on their property, and I don't mean law enforcement, but people wanting interviews or to look at their property or their house so they could be nosy, or to, for others to try to help them, even taking videos of certain parts of their property so people could see the possibilities of how she could have gotten off the property. Well, when Chris from the interview was on the way to the Wells property, Candace stopped off at a store for about 20 minutes, according to Chris. And he told this later on another channel after we viewed Candace's interview. And he says that Candace came out of the store, then she went back in for a few more minutes, and then Chris said to his wife, "She's calling Don." And he said it in a way as if this is something negative or suspicious. Listen, if I bring some random man from YouTube to my property to continue filming during an interview, especially to a property like theirs that can cause a ton of judgment, I'm calling my husband to ask him if it's okay. My butt is going to be sitting in that store until he answers or calls me back before I proceed. It's not just Candace's home, it's both of our homes. Chris, though, connected this to when they got to the house and they climbed down this hidden staircase to the basement, and he noticed there was a TV left on. And he also connected it to when he asked about a shed on the property, and he asked Candace whether or not he can look inside. And he implied that it was, suspicious later in his analysis because he thought that Don was hiding in that shed. And then he took it further, claiming Don had a history of hiding when approached by law enforcement 2 other times in his life. Well, for one, he didn't hide from Hawkins County Sheriff's Office or the TBI. 2, Chris is not current law enforcement, so why would he be hiding from him? 3, he had no reason to hide. He could have simply said he didn't want to do an interview with Chris. He was under no obligation to speak with him, or anybody else for that matter. So while I understand trying to connect it, but it falls flat and sounds like some really deep reaching. So basically it was implied that Candace called Don from the store to give, Don a heads up, and then Don booked it out of the house, hid his work truck somewhere off the property, left the TV on the basement, and hid in his shed so he didn't have to speak with Chris. If Don was home, his work truck would have been on the property, and it was not in the footage Chris took. So that would mean he would have needed to drive the truck off the property, hide it, then walk back to the property, and then hide in his shed. And he went through all this, but left the TV on? I mean, come on. If he wanted to avoid Chris, he simply could have stayed out of the way of the camera and not spoken with him. Or he could have left the property entirely in his truck and not go through the hassle of hiding the truck and then come back and then hide in the shed. And if Candace knew Don had been there and was now hiding from Chris because she gave him a heads up, well, when she climbed down the stairs ahead of Chris, she would have seen the TV on. And when Chris asked, he asked her if they can go through the other door instead of this hidden staircase under the bar, and Candace would have said, "Yeah, meet me down here." And then while Chris walked around to the other side of the house, Candace would have had time to turn it off. But that's not what happened. She actually insisted that he followed her down after already seeing that the TV had been left on. We leave the TV on all the time. We simply forget to turn it off. Nothing more. I mean, it happens. I don't know. We don't go out of the way and be like, "Oh, make sure the TV is off." If we remember, we remember. If we don't, we don't. It should be also noted that when Chris asked Candace if he can go in said shed, she didn't immediately say no. She said, "You can, but," and then described that it had Don's tools and said it was messy, didn't want Chris to get hurt. For spectators and speculators, best believe the cops checked that shed. Summer's not in there, so relax. But that's what she said. She said, "You can, but." Now, maybe it's a shed that Don doesn't really like people going in. Maybe it's his own, he doesn't like anybody going in there. And maybe she was trying to respect that. I don't know. But anyways, we're going to continue about Dawn more in the next episode as we lead into breaking down Candace and her interviews. And at times, we'll be talking about both Candace and Dawn because they go together. Until then, I'll see you soon. Bye.